Hey everybody, welcome to Obscurities in Miniature, and today we are going to have a bit of nostalgia for some people of a certain age and disposition. We're going to take a look at this new book, Machine Robo Wedge, which is going to be a nice visual representation and chronicling of the Machine Robo series of toys. That name probably isn't going to ring a bell to most of us in the English-speaking world, because you probably remember them as GoBots. I know I certainly do. The thing that really stands out to me about this book is this cover. And that's all design work by a very important artist that I don't think gets a whole lot of recognition. I mean, looking at it, it's got to be Katsushi Murakami, who is the main brainchild behind just about every single figure, toy, mechanical design that has come out of Bandai/Toei since like the late 70s. I mean, probably even earlier than that. If you grew up with any of this stuff, especially if you had anything that ever came through the halls of Bandai, chances are this artist was probably responsible for it. And this is a pretty cool book, and it's also quite recent, so it shouldn't be out of print, and if you were one of those people that grew up with the GoBots, might be of interest to you. Because we do get a lot of that behind-the-scenes design work. But we also do get a little bit of the mention of the various animated series, Battle Hackers, Revenge of Kronos, things that I absolutely remember seeing in the early heydays of fan-subbed anime. Now what's cool is, as with most of these MOOC-type books, you get a lot of the visual breakdowns of how everything was packaged. If that's not enough for you, then we get into the actual details of every single figure. And like I said, a lot of these should be very familiar to people of a certain age and collecting nature. The Tank Robot, Battle Robo, absolutely I had this guy. Actually, we had quite a few growing up. And I'll be honest, at least in terms of play value, growing up as a child of the 80s, I feel like we got a lot more bang for our buck with the GoBot stuff, just because they tended to be a little bit smaller, a little bit more compact, and a little less likely to break, for the most part. I mean, the transformations overall were pretty simplistic. You know, obviously just looking at this drill robo here, who shows up in the anime. Basically, you squish the legs in, slide the hands, and you're good to go. There's not a whole lot of work involved in the transformation process. The Scooter Robo, if you ever watched that cartoon, he should look awfully familiar to you. And this is kind of neat, looking back and seeing just how many of these I can remember us owning as kids. Not everything, mind you. And especially once you get past the early stuff, and you start getting into the larger figures, and the funkier figures, that's when things get really interesting. I always wanted to see what one of these kind of battle suit figures look like all put together, and I never once can recall finding the key big DX guy that formed the body. I would always end up finding like the various limb sets, because remember they kind of sold these each individually, which I always thought was kind of cheesy. And that was about it. Of course, the bad guys were always the cooler options. Loved the monsters. I think we had just about every single one of them. I want to say, if I remember correctly, there was a recolor of this guy in purple and green that was like a mail-away exclusive. We'll have to see if it's in here later. I gotta say the Japanese transports were a lot more interesting than the American ones. We did own the American one. My brother, who lives in Japan, was the owner of that specific model. These are some of the bigger models. The Psychoroid, I remember we had that. And we always used to get a kick out of the fact that its name made no sense to us with the Japanese spelling types. The Battle Tank character down here, I know I had this. Really enjoyed that as a kid. The wannabe Optimus Prime here. I don't recall seeing any of these. Maybe they came out in the US, maybe they didn't. certainly I don't recall seeing any of these figures. They like fold up inside of the vehicle. I do not remember if Bai Kung Fu ever got a release outside of Japan, along with Kenryu and Rom. These are the characters from the animated series, but they're also a repackaged, repainted Guardian if you were ever a collector of the early 80s, late 70s Chogokin, Godokin lines of figures. It's basically the same exact thing, and I can recall seeing quite a few leftovers of him on those store shelves later on in the years. Now, what's interesting about this book is we get into some of the weirder stuff, and speaking of recolors that Bandai was shamelessly digging out, I'm pretty sure that this thing right here, the Wargale, is one of the Super Sentai things recolored. Is it Sun Vulcan? I'm not even sure. I know we had quite a few of the parts of this guy. We never owned it all. Holy crap. Rock Lords. I hated Rock Lords. I absolutely hated them. I thought they were the stupidest thing growing up. And again, that brother of mine that lives in Japan was just absolutely enamored with these. Loved them. Absolutely loved them. And especially I can recall a trip. We went to England as children with my parents and wandered through Hamleys at its, heyday of the mid-80s. And I do not recall seeing any of the gem figures in the United States, but I know my brother picked these two in particular up while in England and gloated over that fact that he had the money because we had saved up whatever allowance, birthday money we had. We must have been like, I don't know, 9, 10, maybe younger. And so he went just all in at Hamleys. This also looks like a bit of a recolor of an older Sentai machine. This thing I absolutely don't recall ever seeing, and I probably would have wanted it badly. It looks so goofy, but I would have thought it was so cool back in the day. Now, here's where things get really interesting. You get a lot of the cross art and packaging art for a variety of these early figures. And again, looking at this stuff, it absolutely looks like Murakami's artwork. I could be wrong, but I mean, it's got that old school kind of Sentai look to a lot of it, which wouldn't be surprising considering he, designed most of those as well. It's also kind of neat to see what could have been in these types of books. We get into the later, early 2000s series. I want to say it was like a rescue series or something. Rescue Machine Robo or something along those lines. I can recall seeing it on the shelves. Never was really interested before I had kids. And by the time I had kids, it was not something that they were really fond of. But again, very Sentai-looking designs. Now this is what's cool is in the back of the book, we start to see some of the foreign packaging. And where is it? We do eventually get full-on GoBots. Even the Wendy's Happy Meal GoBots are included in here. That is pretty cool. I want to say these are just the recolors that a lot of the American versions got, if I'm reading that correctly. GoBots Packaging Puzzler. I don't remember them called that, but okay. That command center was lame. My brother had it. I never cared for it. Some of this stuff looks familiar. Some of it not as much. Some of the various Rock Lords that never saw release outside of Japan. I should say the other way around. They were never released inside of Japan. Quite a few of these were foreign releases only. And I do believe that we owned them all, or I should say my brother owned them all. This guy in particular, I believe, was a larger one that he picked up in England as well, with the fist on the string. This guy was weird, and I remember somebody in the family used to want to lick it. I don't know why. I can recall somebody I don't know if it was because of the tongue, and that's what I'm thinking of. I don't even know. It's like we've got all kinds of the weird extra goods in here. Some of the stuff that never got released. Always cool to see. Various anime and magazine tie-ins. We've got interviews with a lot of the artists and designers in the back, as well as straight black and white line art as well. Always cool to see. Just a fun, interesting look back. And unfortunately, oh boy, for a book of this size and for that price, that's a tough pill to swallow at barely a little over 100 pages. Thankfully, I'm sure neither myself nor my brothers picked this up for anywhere close to that. So do your due diligence. Keep your eyes peeled. There's always places like Surugaya and Mandarake that are constantly having deals running, so you might be able to pick up a copy out there if you're patient. And as far as I know, there haven't been a whole lot of other books published specifically on this line of figures. Obviously, most people tend to remember Transformers, and I mean, at this point, the legacy of the G1 stuff has lived on well past the days of their Diaclone origins. Of course, if you want to pick up those Diaclone books, those are going to cost you a pretty penny too, of which there are a couple at this point that I believe Hobby Japan has put out as well. But those have a lot of the new stuff also, if you're curious about that. So they are out there and they do exist. But I will leave those to you guys to hunt down because they are way out of my price range. So, with that said, this has been High Lord Tamberlane with Obscurities and Miniatures, saying thanks for watching, and we'll see you back here soon. Bye-bye.